Most young men are not falling for the reactionary bullshit.
Right.
They are absolutely not. There is no strong evidence of a turn towards more reactionary views on gender among the overwhelming majority of boys and young men.
Hey, hi. Great to see you. Come on in. Welcome to Alive. Okay, so, in your opinion, what does it mean to be a man? Right. Is it just a question purely of biology? Is it about more? Is it about providing, protecting, chopping down a tree, making a house, rebuilding a carburetor, making a cup of tea for your friend? You want tea? Because as a man, I think it's actually really complex, but I keep hearing in the media and especially online in this thing called the manosphere that it's actually pretty simple, that it's really just about strength and dominance and the ability to choke you out and kick your ass and to never ever be wrong. And I gotta say, that pisses me off because it's just so tragically inadequate, right? Strength has to be about something else. Real strength has to be about more than that. Yoda was not able to lift the X-Wing because he was yoked. He was tapped into something that was more than muscles. And so on one hand, here you go, I keep hearing this definition of masculinity that's just about being tough. And on the other hand, I keep hearing that there is a crisis of masculinity and all these warnings that we might somehow be at the end of men. And that's got me wondering if this current definition of masculinity is supposed to be so tough, why does it also seem so fragile? You know? What do you think? Interesting. Okay. All right. Let's go. Okay. Today, our guest is Richard Reeves, who is a social scientist, and basically, I think, probably the most thoughtful explainer of what's been happening with boys and men right now. Richard runs the American Institute for Boys and Men, and his book, Of Boys and Men, has become kind of a modern field guide in a way for understanding why so many men are struggling. But what I love about it is it's not like in a hand-wringing sort of, this is the end of men sort of way. It's very sort of clear, compassionate, data-driven. Richard grew up in the UK, studied at Oxford, advised the British government, no big deal, ran think tanks, and now writes and researches in the US. What I like about him is that he talks about masculinity clearly, but without all the nostalgia and without all the panic. Like he's not trying to bring us back to the 50s or anything, and he's not trying to shame anyone. Oh wait, he's here. Hang on. Hey, Richard, how you doing?
Hey.
It's good to see you.
Thanks, Steve. How are you? Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your book, I have to say. I thought it was really pretty much an amazing read. So thanks for writing it. If it's okay with you, we should just jump right on in.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. I'm excited.
So we're talking today about masculinity and what that currently means, right? Because it is my sense that the definition of this word has been very much in flux, especially of late. So what's your best definition of masculinity?
Well, I will say it's always in flux.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing we have to say, first of all, is it's always being defined and redefined over time, even more than like femininity.
Mm.
I think because like women have such a kind of historically clearer role, right? What turns a girl into a woman is just more obvious reproductively, like across history. Whereas we've had to we always have to define and redefine masculinity, especially mature masculinity. And the best definition that I've really come across, I think still works, is that to be masculine is to be giving more than you get. It is to be contributing more to the tribe than you're taking out of it. And there's not like a moment where there's like a rite of passage. So when do you become like a man, right? Because you think of masculinity as opposed. So I guess I might be answering a question like what makes a man, but let's assume that they're related. Is that being masculine is actually to be a provider in the broadest sense of that term, right? That you're just giving more to the tribe and the community than you need for yourself. So you kill more meat than you need to eat. You provide more protection than just for yourself. Whatever it is, more energy, more money, but more. You're a generator of a surplus of one kind or another. You're a net contributor to the group and to the tribe. I think that's at the heart of what masculinity is about.
That's already a surprising definition. So, I mean, I also see the kind of utilitarian aspect of it, of the provider, the usefulness of it. Would you say that part of the masculine identity, from your view, is a response to societal needs?
Yeah, I think it's the usefulness to others. It is that provision of service, care, energy, meat, money, whatever it is. And so there's this online movement of men just called men going their own way.
Yes, yeah.
That's the opposite of masculinity. The distinction I sometimes make when I think about this is between relational masculinity. In other words, defined through your relationships as a dad, as a husband, as a coach, as a neighbor, as a guy on the street, whatever, right? But through the relationships you have with other people, versus what you might think of as like a lone ranger masculinity, right? Where masculinity is defined precisely by the absence of relationships. It's about being on your own, right? It's the lonely, heroic figure who doesn't need anybody and is not needed by anybody. He's just his own man, right? And I think that's the antithesis of masculinity as it's been defined in cultures over time, right? If the men don't stick around and do the things that the tribe and the family and the community needs them to do, then the tribe and the community and the family won't do very well. And so the guy who goes off on his own is the anti-male rather than the male. I think the least masculine thing to do is to go off on your own.
Interesting. Do you think that has changed, though, over time? How do you think it's currently defined? Because to me, it feels like it's been changing.
Well, to me, it feels like it's in a period of massive flux and contest, right? I think that the result of this huge change in women's lives and the relationship between men and women, I think is essentially it's created this massive uncertainty about where we're going in terms of masculinity because of the unsettling of the old ideas of what it meant to be a woman and femininity, right? Away from housewife, mother, etc. I think that's had a knock-on consequence, which is like, okay, what does that mean then for masculinity and for men? And actually, there's a really nice phrase from this academic, John Della Volpe, who says that a lot of men, especially young men, are suffering from masculinity vertigo. And what he means by that is that like you're getting bombarded with completely different contrasting messages depending on which day of the week it is or which particular algorithm is kind of following you right now, or you're following. On Monday, you're being told, the problem is that you're not masculine enough. Masculinity is about pumping, being strong, taking protein, being assertive, right? Exactly right. That's right. And the problem, men are all soy boys and they're all soft and they need to kind of get harder again. And like masculinity is about that. And then on Tuesday, they're being told that their problem is that they're too masculine and that they need to kind of cry more and get in touch with their feminine side and get rid of their toxicity and basically, become more like women, right? And then on Wednesday, they're back to the other definition. So I think it's a period of real anxiety and uncertainty about what this means. So there's a group, a very progressive men's group called Equimundo, who I work with a bit, and they did a survey of young men under 30, pretty recently, and they found that 2/3 of men said that they wanted to become more masculine.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't ask any follow-up questions. It wasn't in the survey to then say, well, what do you mean by that? And so there's simultaneously a kind of desire on the part of men, especially young men, to be masculine, but a massive argument and disagreement about what that means. And so I think we're living through a period of genuine anxiety and uncertainty. The mere fact we're having this conversation, I think, tells you that. Like, I'm in my mid-50s. I grew up in the UK, but in the US. But I think this question of masculinity is just in the air in a way that it just wasn't when I was growing up and in other periods. And I think that's because we are going through a period of massive cultural change, largely brought about by the successes, which I applaud, of the women's movement, which has raised the question of what it means to be masculine or even to be a man in a way that just wasn't asked 40 years ago.
Right, because if masculinity has historically been defined in relation to its utility, in its relation to its usefulness to provide for your immediate community or your larger community, and these tremendous gains that we see from women are changing essentially what it means to provide for that community, right? Now everyone's providing together, right? And so the core tenets of that masculine identity are being upended by all of these gains that are being made by a feminine identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That makes sense.
I mean, like, my dad didn't have to think about it too much because, like, it was economic breadwinner. His role as a provider was defined pretty squarely by the paycheck. It's not that that's all he did, but that was like the foundational thing. But, you know, the whole point of Gloria Steinem, the feminist scholar, feminist activist, said that we have to make marriage a choice rather than a necessity for women, because actually marriage was an economic necessity for women for most of, or pair bonding for most of human history until pretty recently. And I promise not to bore you with too many statistics. One of the mottos of my new institute, internal mottos, not our public motto, is keep it boring. It must be boring. And my son said, when I told him that, he said, well, you are definitely the man for that job, Dad.
I don't think you're boring, and I love statistics, so go on.
Well, in that case, you're unusual. But I will give a statistic because I think this is a good way to describe it. So if we take like the typical man, like the median man in the middle of the wage distribution, the male wage distribution. So think about a guy that's earning right in the middle, right, of male wages, right? That's the median earner. Well, in 1979, only 13% of women earned more than the median man. Right, more than a typical man. So that would have only about 1 in 10 women would have been in the top half of the male wage distribution. It's just cleared 40%. So 40% is not 50%, right? It's not equality, right? It's not that 50. If you had absolute equality, then 50% of women will be earning more than 50% of men. The distributions would be the same. That's not happened. But 40% compared to 13%, and that's just since 1979. Yeah. I was 10.
40 years, in
1979. I mean, like, so this unbelievably rapid change, and in fact, in 40% of U.S. households now, women are the main breadwinner.
Yeah,
a lot. Some of those are single parents, but nonetheless, again, and that was 10% in the 70s. And so these are dramatic economic changes, and that's exactly what the women's movement was fighting for: was to break the tie of dependency, economic dependency that women felt on men. But here's the thing: men could depend on the dependency of women in order to define their role, right? In order to they knew what they needed to do. We knew what we needed to do, right? So the mere fact that women and children were economically dependent on us made our role pretty crystal clear. It also meant that if we couldn't fulfill it, that was very, very troubling, right? But it made for a nice clear, it was pretty simple. And I think this is one of the reasons why some people now are almost hankering to go back. You see this trad wives movement online, and you obviously see some men online, etc. And I think that what they're really hungering for is clarity of purpose, clarity of role. I need a script. I need a clear script again. I do think we've done a much better job of telling young men especially, what they shouldn't do than what they should do. And so I think in this confusion and in this vacuum, I understand why some people are saying, well, it used to be pretty simple for both men and women, right? They knew their roles. They knew what success looked like. They knew what their role was in relationship to each other. They knew what to expect of each other, right? She expected him to bring home the bacon, and he expected her to cook the bacon and raise the kids. And everyone kind of knew where they stood. There wasn't lots of discussion of roles. It was nice and simple. It was also brutally unfair. And it meant we were leaving lots of female talent on the table. But it was nice and clear. And so I think in a period of massive lack of clarity and uncertainty and anxiety and confusion, a lot of people are reaching for our solutions in the past. And I understand that, but it's both wrong morally because of the massive gains of the women's movement are to be applauded, and also just completely impractical as a matter of fact. So we've got to go through the discomfort, find something better.
Every year, I tell myself that I'm going to perfectly plan all of my meals. And then every year, I totally don't do that. But what I realized is that dinner doesn't always have to be perfect. It kind of just has to work. And that's why Marley Spoon totally works for me. Because some nights, like, I actually cook this way. Some nights I just heat something up, and some nights I just need food on the table without even thinking about it. And Marley Spoon flexes with all of that. They've got a big marketplace, meal shortcuts, drinks, groceries, so you can build the week the way you actually want. It totally works. And honestly, I end up cooking at home a whole lot more, and I eat a whole lot better. And that's the truth. So this year, fast track your way to eating well with Marley Spoon. Head to marleyspoon.com/offer/alive for up to 25 free meals. That's right. Up to 25 free meals with Marley Spoon. That's marleyspoon.com/offer/alive for up to 25 free meals.
You know, you talked about anxiety. I have anxiety about this because, man, I get pissed. Like this, it upsets me. Perhaps it's because I am, you know, a short, hipster nerd who was bullied in junior high or whatever. But, there is a brand of masculinity being pushed right now that I find tragic, that I find, incredibly inadequate and just impractically incomplete as it relates to strength and dominance and all of these things. And it's being really celebrated on especially online, but also in politics, also in culture. And I can see how that is a reaction to a traditional concept of masculine identity. But it does bother me. It really does. You know? Well,
it should bother you. But so I'll make you feel worse and then try and make you feel better. I'll make you feel worse by saying that, look, it's not just the reactionaries that you're referring to online, I think, who are to blame. I think that too many people on the progressive side have had just a deficit framed model of masculinity and of the role of men, right? They have refuse to accept that men might have problems because they are so convinced that men are the problem. Right. We invented, the progressive left invented the term toxic masculinity in 2016. Didn't really exist outside of the margins of academia until 2016. It didn't exist as a term, right? Now, it's all a lot of young men have heard. In fact, there's some evidence now that a bunch of young people don't know that the word masculinity can actually exist without the modifier toxic.
Seriously?
Because they've only ever heard... Yeah, because they've only ever heard the word masculinity with the word toxic in front of it. And so mansplaining, manspreading, the Me Too movement, toxic masculinity. And I want to be clear, there's lots of examples of really bad male behavior, of cruelty and abuse and assault and harassment and misuse of power that we should be continuing to hold to account. As a huge supporter of the Me Too movement, for example, in terms of just changing that behavior. But to then frame that as being about toxic masculinity, or to basically end up doing a lot of man blaming, created the conditions in which I think a lot of boys and young men were like, well, look, I know what that lot think of me. They think I'm toxic and that I suck and that men are hashtag men are trash, right? I know what they think of me. Let's see what this lot think of me. And this lot over here, the more reactionary kind of types, they at least seem to kind of like me. and they think I have a role, and they think I have a purpose, and they think the things I like aren't bad. And I think if you frame it that way, it's not surprising what we've seen. So that's to make you feel worse.
It did.
To make you feel better, okay, good. To make you feel better, most young men, boys and young men, are not falling for the reactionary bullshit.
Right.
They are absolutely not. There is no strong evidence of a turn towards more reactionary views on gender among the overwhelming majority of boys and young men. They remain committed to gender equality. A recent survey by Common Sense Media found that actually teenage boys more strongly associate themselves with feminine characteristics than masculine characteristics. The number of boys who've been in a fight in high school has halved in the last 10 years. Violent crime is way down. But more importantly, a lot of boys and young men are just they're aware of these other models, and of course some are actually sold on it. But actually, it's more just they're reacting against this pathologization of masculinity. You said this point about identity threat, right? I think if you actually do want to risk really having people lean into an identity, you do exactly what you've said, which is threaten it, right? If you threaten someone's identity as a man or a Jewish person or as a gay person or as a black person or whatever, and you say there's something wrong with that identity, then the most natural human response is to lean harder into it. Is to say screw you, and make that and weight that identity more strongly. And so I think we've created some of those conditions. But the more I look at the surveys of and the work with actual living boys and young men, as opposed to people online, they're mostly not falling for that bullshit. They know that they don't want a trad wife.
Oh, that's great. That is great news. You did make me feel worse and then make me feel better. And that actually makes and that actually does make a lot of sense. So let's see if I'm getting this right. We've understood sort of how there's been a masculine identity that for lots of reasons is in flux and is changing rapidly, very rapidly. I was surprised by your statistic from 1979. So it's changing like exponentially on an exponential curve, which threatens a masculine identity coupled with one side's really pathologizing all of masculinity as being very negative. And then the reaction to that from a place of threat is, oh yeah? Oh yeah? I'll show you toxic.
Watch this.
Right, yeah. And
so exactly. Yeah, that's a brilliant summary. That's a superb summary of what I think is happening.
So you're getting almost like a feedback loop here, right? It becomes almost like a negative feedback loop here.
Very polarizing. Yeah. And you also see that happening between young men and young women as well, where I think a lot of young men, that the reactionaries, that I'll use these labels for now, but some of these kind of more reactionary, they're trying to persuade young men that their problem is young women.
Yeah.
Right, and that young women suck, and they're all kind of super liberal and hate men, and kind of blue haired man hating or whatever, right? But also on the other side, there's been a long, also a campaign to kind of persuade young women that, like, well, the problem. The problem is not the labor market or the housing market or the cost of college. The problem is mansplaining, toxic masculinity, the patriarchy, etc. So there's this very unfortunate tendency, I think, for the polarization to try and end up with almost like a gender war among young people. And that's a tragic waste of lots of things, but not least it's a tragic waste of political energy, because if basically young men and young women are spending most of their political energy hating on each other, that means less political energy being spent on improving our education system, our housing system, our college system, making all those things, wages, the boring stuff like that. It's more exciting and attention grabbing online to have, like, the man versus bear phenomenon. Did you follow that?
Sure.
That was a meme about a year ago.
It's who would you rather meet in a forest, a human man or an actual bear?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And it was bear, and most of them said bear, and of course, like, there were lots of opportunities to comment on that, none of which I took because it's very definitely not boring enough.
Right.
But it's the kind of thing that's really, it captures something real about the anxiety of both sexes around gender right now. But I find it very frustrating that we can spend a lot of time on something like that and then not look at the fact that the chances of a young man going from school to college now are lower than they were in the 60s.
Yeah.
And I think that's an actual real problem. Or the share of men who are able to buy a house, dropping, and women, but these actual problems that people are facing, these actual, they're boring, and so they get less attention than Man versus Bear, or do you hate the Barbie movie, or hashtag men are trash, or or jokes about women. And so it's become a cultural divide much more than a real divide.
You started to touch on men feeling unneeded and feeling untethered in this moment, and you started to mention some of the actual very real problems that men do have right now that often are under-discussed or largely unseen.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is problem stuff, so it's going to be quite negative, but I think it's important that we're honest about the problems that many men have. I've mentioned these huge education gaps. So boys and men are behind on every metric in education. In the average school district, boys are a year behind girls in key literacy tests, etc. Huge gaps on college campuses. Just our education system's just not doing very well by our boys and men. That flows into education later and to work. So if you look at men in their early 20s, men between the ages of 20 and 24, 1 in 10 of them aren't working or in college. So we don't really know what they're doing. So that's a decimation of young men in terms of we don't know what they're doing. And huge mental health challenges for both young men and young women, but the way they play out for young men is different. It's more externalizing, and in particular harm towards self. So the suicide rate among boys and young men is 4 times higher than it is among young women, and it's gone up. And in particular, one of the ones that really keeps me awake at night, which I didn't even know about, I didn't have this data when I wrote the book, but since 2010, all of the rise in suicide has been among young men.
Really?
It's young men. It's risen by almost a third
really?
Among men under the age of 30. Just since 2010. That's a very short period of time for a massive increase. That is a public health crisis. The loss of life. So you're losing 40,000 men a year to suicide now in the US, which is the same as the death toll from breast cancer among women. And because men's mental health challenges very often don't get diagnosed and men struggle to get help with them for all kinds of reasons we could talk about, you just see this huge death toll. And another one that really puts a pin in it for me is the loss of life from drug overdoses among men. So this is not suicide. This is from drug poisonings, from overdoses, which is hard to classify. But we've seen this, obviously the opioid crisis, which hit everybody hard, but hit men really hard over the last few decades. And so to put a data point on this, the increase in male deaths since 2000 from drugs, from opioids, largely fentanyl, etc. The increase means the loss of an additional 400,000 men since 2000. So that's just the increase. That's not the number. That's just the increase. So if you hadn't had any increase in the level, it would have been 400,000 more men that we would have with us today than we do. And 400,000 is exactly the number of men that we lost in World War II, that the US lost in World War II. And so we've lost the equivalent of a world war in terms of male deaths since 2000 from the increase in deaths from drugs. That is, I mean, when you're at World War level loss of life, then I think it's fair to say that is a public health crisis, and that is just much, much higher among men than it is among women. So my institute did that analysis. It hadn't been done before. And that's because it's not really anybody's job to just look at this data through that lens of saying, well, look, there are some differences here between men and women. Women have a huge number of issues, which we could spend another hour talking about. But that doesn't mean that there aren't massive challenges for men. And the last one I'll give you is that male wages have gone up for men with a college degree, but they have not gone up at all for men without a college degree. So most American men don't really earn more today than most American men did in 1979. And so if you've had stagnant wages for what is now approaching half a century for the majority of men, I mean, obviously, I'm talking not individual men might see pay rises, but as a group, men without a college degree haven't seen any increase in wages for half a century. That's a very significant economic fact, of course, but I also think it's a hugely significant social fact. Like if you're not any better off than your father was, which is true for most of those men, and many of them are actually worse off than their fathers were, that is a very significant psychological blow. Back to your point about identity, I think a lot of us compare ourselves to our parents, and I think that for the many, many, many men who are actually economically and socially worse off than their fathers were, that is a hard blow.
Sure.
I love the idea of a sophisticated cocktail by the fire in the winter. I do, but what I do not love is the way it makes me feel the next day. And that's what I dig about Little Saints. It's a real cocktail experience. It's got the whole ritual, the big ice, the glass, the citrus peel, the sophistication, but no alcohol and no sugar. And it actually tastes like something you'd be proud to pour for your friends, which I've done. Little Saints is great for entertaining and hosting, actually, or just for winding down. There's all kinds of good stuff in there, like botanicals, like reishi, like lion's mane. It just helps you stay present and have a little extra treat and still maintain a good tomorrow. So if you love cocktails, but not the aftermath that comes with them, visit littlesaints.com. Enter promo code ALIVE to get 15% off your first order. That's littlesaints.com, promo code ALIVE, ALIVE.
We talk a lot on this podcast about generational financial trauma and how emotional money is as it relates to identity. And if you compound that with something as intrinsic as masculine identity, how you are expected to show up and provide within your society, you can see how those are powerful motivators. And you can see how someone would react strongly and as you said, push back, right? As a way of fighting back. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit about some of these male reactions. We mentioned the manosphere. You talked a little about men going their own way. In your book, one of the things that fascinated me was in Japan. I hope I'm saying it right. The hikikomori, is that how you say it?
Hikikomori.
That fascinated me. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so these are men who've just retreated completely from society, and they go into their bedrooms. They're typically young men still living at home, and they don't work. It's almost like an anti-capitalist thing, but it's also an anti-women thing, an anti-family. It's basically just, I am just going to. It is like the cowboy, but rather than going off into the range and being self-reliant, he's actually just sitting in his bedroom and waiting for his mum to put a tray of food outside his room. Because sometimes they won't even let their family come in the room. And so this got bad enough that the Japanese government actually kind of created a whole policy around it to study it and try and work on it, because we're just seeing, particularly these young men, kind of just withdrawing altogether. And so and there's now some studies in Italy and in the US to just look at these men who have, it's a very, very small number, to be clear, the share, but who've completely withdrawn. And the reason I mentioned those in the book, and it's interesting, is because I think that in some ways they're just the tip of the iceberg, right? I think that there are a lot of young men who maybe haven't completely withdrawn and are literally hikikomori on their own in the room, but they are spending a lot more time on their own. Derek Thompson at The Atlantic has written a lot about this, on a lot of time online. And there's nothing wrong with gaming. There's nothing wrong with a lot of online activity, to be clear. But if it's instead of in real life, if it's displacing those in real life relationships and those relational skills, then that's potentially a kind of huge problem. So you see higher levels of male isolation than you do for women, young men in particular. Dan Cox at the American Enterprise Institute, he found that 15% of men under 30 say that they don't have a single close friend.
Wow.
And that was just 3% in 1990. It was very, very rare, vanishingly rare, to say you didn't have a single close friend. But now it's 1 in 7, according to Dan's work. Now, there are other surveys that find different trends, to be clear. But I think this issue of being in a community, being in relationships, is a problem. And it's particularly a problem for men, because if you believe in relational masculinity, as we discussed earlier, the absence of relationships is really, really tragic for men. I think they really flounder if they don't have that connection and if they don't feel that sense of being needed and of being connected. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a poll, NBC poll, and it found that among Trump supporting men, having a family, having kids, wife and kids, was number 1 on their priority list. And then for Harris voting women, it was, I don't know, but like 13th or something,
really?
Right?
That
and
far
with every
down?
Variation in between. Yes. Yeah, I don't know what the number actually was, but it was low down. The point was like, and there was this very interesting reaction, which was like, oh, these guys, they just want a trad wife and they just want a traditional marriage. They just want to be the man of the house again. And look, there might be some of that, as we discussed a moment ago. But mostly what I think that was a lot of these guys, maybe it's not a terrible thing that they've realized that actually having a family, having someone who needs you isn't a bad thing. Maybe more men are realizing that they need to be needed. And if that's true, that is not a bad development, right? That's a good development. And we should be very careful not to immediately pour cold water on this desire of men to do that. In fact, men now are more likely than women to say that getting married and having a family is important.
I'm sorry, what?
And I think they're right about that.
That's real now?
Yeah.
That seems like a huge inversion of everything that I think I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's counterintuitive because I think the stereotype is that like women are the ones who want to kind of get married and have kids, and they might trap a man into it, and he's like, he wants to go off on his own, and she has to find a way to lure him in because man's natural state is to be off, and women's natural state is to have this. So how do you get men into this domestic situation? That's the problem for women, right? That's the stereotype. Completely untrue. It's actually men now who say that having a family is more important for them than women. Women feel more choices now about what they're going to do. Maybe I will become a mum. Maybe I won't. Still figuring it out. Maybe I will get married. Maybe I won't. So women are feeling this much greater sense of independence. And it's actually men who are saying, no, I need a family. And I think that the inversion and the counterintuitive nature of that is a good sign, because I think what it means is that men realize this. Men have not fallen for this trope of you don't need women, you don't need kids, don't be burdened with all that. Be the solitary warrior, the cowboy, or the modern equivalent. The guy in the bar in Manhattan, dating a sequence of women, or with his Porsches or whatever you find online, right? Don't you want to be that guy? And the overwhelming answer from most men is hell no. Thank you very much. I would like to find someone to love and kids to raise and a home to build.
Wow. I did not know that. I think it's because I'm older and most of my friends have already made those decisions. So I wasn't aware of that. That is a very surprising bit of information there.
Yeah, it's about 10 percentage point difference according to Pew in the share of men who say that's the And I like it because I do think there are all these myths around, and some of them are quite anti-men myths in a way that are propagated on all sides about men don't want to settle down, men don't want to commit, all that stuff, and all of the evidence says that's just not true. Men do want to commit, men do want to live for somebody else, and that's a wonderful thing.
I think maybe it's, for me, if masculinity does need a new identity, maybe it's about an honest reckoning, sort of. We don't have to pretend that masculinity is not about strength, or that it's not about being able to provide, or that it's not about being able to protect. But we can add to it and say that it is also about these softer things, quote unquote, softer things that you were outlining in your bike story: empathy, compassion. Right. All of these things are also part of what it means to be strong. At least in my lived experience, they are, and, I don't fit the manosphere's definition of an alpha male, but I don't feel weak in this world. I don't. I simply don't. So I think maybe there's a way of adding to this identity as opposed to trying to fix it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's right. Be expansive. So I think we can take a lesson there from the women's movement, because what the women's movement successfully did was it expanded the range of roles that kind of women could be part of. Yeah. But it also largely avoided the trap of saying that we have to get rid of femininity. Yeah. Right. In order for women to be successful, they have to stop being feminine. Now, I'm not saying that was completely successful, but there was a period where women were being told, well, you're going to have to wear shoulder pads and deepen your voice and do assertiveness training and stand in. In other words, in order to succeed in this world of men, you're going to have to kind of become less feminine, sound more like a man, act more like a man, look more like a man. Right? And enough women just said, no, I'm not doing that. Thank you very much. I do not feel the need to stop being feminine. But I do reject the idea that because I'm feminine, I can't be CEO or president. And God bless them for that. That was a major, major breakthrough, because what it means is we can do the same thing and say, sure, we want gender equality and we want to go into others, but we want to expand what masculinity looks like, but keep some of those basic virtues and those inclinations around strength and protection and appropriate risk taking, if necessary, risking yourself for the lives of another, which is something that does skew very male, right? If we look at those professions and those people doing that, right? Hopefully we don't need to do that, but keep all of that, but then apply it in just many, many different ways, including in the home, including in the school, including in, the church group or wherever it is, you can apply it. So I love what you've just done there, because you've taken a leaf from the women's movement book and said, we don't need to abandon masculinity or embrace androgyny. We need to expand masculinity and apply it in a modern context. The masculine virtues remain. They will just be applied in different places and in different ways, along with feminine virtues, and one is not better than the other. But I think that the understandable move for equality has sometimes run the risk of downgrading masculine virtues in the interest of smashing the patriarchy. There's been this sense of while we're at it, let's smash all the masculine virtues and basically say, if you want to get with the program, the future is female. But the future is female is a terrible slogan, especially for boys and young men. The future is equal, not female.
Right.
And so we've got to find a way to kind of channel and celebrate masculine virtue, but in a modern, more equal context. And the reactionaries will take us back and say, we need real men to be real men again and women to know their place. And the progressives will say, do we really need men and masculinity anymore? Those are very outdated patriarchal views that you've just been expressing there, Steve. Can't we just get rid of all that? Why can't you just all become women? And neither of those messages is appealing to young men. We've got to do better than either of those.
Yeah. Interesting. Richard, this has been a very fascinating conversation, and I was looking very forward to talking to you, and I'm glad we were able to do this. This has been really illuminating. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, likewise, that was a real journey. It was a real conversation. There's this guy, Theodore Zeldin. He's a French writer in the UK now. And I feel like this, having spoken to you, he says a communication is just when pieces of information get passed between people. A conversation is when you create something new, when the ideas get brought into kind of collision and something new happens. And I feel like you've really pushed me, and I've said stuff and thought about stuff in a new way. This idea of identity threat and kind of leaning into that, I think that's really good. I think these ideas about expansion and virtue, how do we make something a virtue in the context of masculinity, and then apply it in new contexts? That's really expanded my own thinking on some of these issues. So I really want to thank you for that.
And
it's a lot of fun.
And right back at you, Richard. I want to thank you as well. This has been a fascinating conversation. And have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, likewise. Great to meet you.
Bye.
Bye now.
All right. That was awesome. I learned quite a bit from that. One thing I really liked when he said that masculinity is fundamentally relational, and that being masculine is about giving more than you get, right? About being a net contributor to society or to your tribe. I like that, because it reframes masculinity as about empathy and service, not just dominance and strength. We all have a need to be needed, and men know it. I was super surprised to learn that men are now more likely than women to say that marriage and family are central to a meaningful life. That surprised me. To me, that suggests that there is currently a cultural need for masculine connection as opposed to retreat. And yeah, he said that masculine identity has always been evolving. It's always been in flux. What it means to be a man has never been set in stone, which makes me wonder why so many people keep looking backward to an old, set, small definition. Let's go. So, as a man, I would say that there are aspects of my masculine identity that could use some work, for sure. But I'm wondering what part of that work
is about replacing things, and what part of it is about letting things evolve and adding to them, right? Like strength and courage and risk-taking. These are all qualities that I think are part of my masculine identity. But I can tell you, in my lived experience, the strongest I've ever felt was not when I was dominating something. It was when I was using my strength to help someone else. Biggest risk I've ever taken was being vulnerable. And bravest thing I ever did was ask for help. And that makes me wonder, what takes more strength? Fiercely protecting an idea as you understand it, or admitting that your understanding of that idea might need to change? What do you think? Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for coming by today. It's always great to see you. It means a lot. And you look great.
Alive with Steve Burns is a Lemonada Media original. If you haven't subscribed to Lemonada Premium yet, now's the perfect time. You can listen to the show completely ad-free, plus you'll unlock exclusive bonus content from me as I reflect on this episode. Just press subscribe on Apple Podcasts, head to lemonadapremium.com to subscribe on any other app, or listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership. That's lemonadapremium.com. Alive is hosted by me, Steve Burns, and produced by Jeremy Slutskin. Our editor is Christopher Champion Morgan. Our associate producer is Akshaz Tharabailu. Audio engineering by James Sparber. Lemonada's SVP of weekly programming is Steve Nelson. Executive producers are Jessica Cordover-Kramer, Stephanie Whittles-Wax, and me. We'll see you next week. And you look great, by the way.